Argentina was once richer than Italy. So how did it become a global symbol of economic collapse? Again, and again, and again. At the start of the 20th century, Argentina was one of the wealthiest nations on earth. Today, it struggles with triple-digit inflation, repeated debt defaults, and constant political turmoil. So what went wrong? Was it bad luck? Foreign pressure? Corruption? Or something deeper built into the system itself? Because the real story of Argentina's decline is far more complex and far more disturbing than most people realize. To understand Argentina's problems, you have to begin with something shocking. In 1913, Argentina ranked among the top 10 richest countries in the world by GDP per capita, rivaling France and Germany. Its fertile pampas produced massive agricultural exports. Buenos Aires looked more European than many European cities. Millions of immigrants arrived, believing this was the future. Economists once called Argentina the United States of South America. But today, Argentina has experienced multiple hyperinflations, 9 sovereign debt defaults, currency collapses, IMF bailouts, capital flight, political polarization lasting decades. So what flipped the script? After World War II, Argentina entered a new political era, dominated by Juan Perón, whose ideology later, called Peronism, reshaped the country forever. Perón expanded workers' rights, raised wages, nationalized industries, and strengthened labor unions. Millions benefited. Living standards rose. The poor gained political power for the first time. But these policies came with trade-offs. The government increased spending far faster than productivity grew. Exports stagnated. Foreign reserves drained. Inflation accelerated. To cover deficits, authorities increasingly turned to money printing. This created a cycle Argentina would repeat for decades: spend heavily to run deficits to borrow abroad, or print money to inflation explodes to crisis, to reset, to repeat. By the late 20th century, inflation had become embedded in Argentine society. Prices didn't rise yearly, they rose monthly, weekly, sometimes daily. During the hyperinflation of 1989, prices increased by over 3,000% in a single year. Families rushed to spend paychecks before they lost value. Businesses stopped long-term planning. Savings evaporated. This permanently damaged trust in the peso, banks, governments, economic institutions. Argentines began storing wealth in dollars, under mattresses or offshore accounts. That alone weakened the financial system because people stopped believing their own country's money would hold value. Every time inflation surged, Argentina tried to stabilize the economy. One famous attempt came in the 1990s, when the peso was pegged 1-to-1 with the US dollar. At first, it worked. Inflation collapsed. Foreign investment poured in. Growth returned. But the peg meant Argentina could no longer control its own monetary policy. When exports slowed and borrowing increased, the government ran massive deficits financed with foreign debt. By 2001, the system snapped. Argentina defaulted on over $100 billion in sovereign debt, the largest default in history at the time. Banks froze accounts. Riots erupted. Presidents resigned in rapid succession. It wasn't just an economic collapse, it was a social one. Since then, Argentina has oscillated between two broad strategies. One side expands state control, subsidies, and welfare programs. The other promises market reforms, spending cuts, privatization, and IMF agreements. Each new government tries to undo what the previous one did. That policy whiplash scares investors. Infrastructure projects stall. Businesses hesitate to expand. Capital flees the country during election years. Economists often describe Argentina's biggest weakness not as lack of resources, but lack of credible long-term rules. When laws, taxes, currency regimes, and regulations constantly change, planning for the future becomes impossible. So here's the real dilemma. Argentina has enormous natural wealth, vast farmland, lithium reserves, oil and gas in the Vaca Muerta shale formation, a highly educated population. On paper, this country should be thriving, yet generation after generation grows up amid crisis. Why? Because Argentina isn't just facing bad policies, it's trapped inside self-reinforcing feedback loops. Inflation discourages saving, leads to people dollarize, leads to banks weaken, leads to governments borrow abroad, leads to debt grows, leads to crisis hits, leads to inflation returns. Breaking that loop requires years of painful stability. Exactly the thing Argentine politics struggles to sustain. Argentina is the IMF's largest debtor. Every bailout comes with conditions: cut subsidies, reduce deficits, raise taxes, float the currency. These measures often stabilize finances, but at a heavy social cost. Utility bills rise, jobs disappear, protests fill the streets. Politicians who impose austerity lose elections. Their replacements expand spending again. The cycle restarts. To stop money from leaving the country, governments impose currency controls, limits on how many dollars citizens can buy. This creates black market exchange rates, smuggling, arbitrage, distorted prices. When the official peso rate differs wildly from the street rate, trust evaporates even faster. Every Argentine learns to think in two currencies. That alone reveals how fragile the system has become. Another long-term problem: institutional credibility. Argentina has repeatedly rewritten debt contracts, frozen bank deposits, nationalized companies, changed pension rules. Even when leaders promise stability, markets remember. Foreign investors demand high interest rates. That makes borrowing more expensive, which worsens deficits, which fuels inflation, which confirms everyone's fears. A vicious circle. So here's the uncomfortable truth. Argentina isn't doomed because it lacks talent or resources. It's trapped because its political economy rewards short-term survival over long-term discipline. Every government faces the same impossible choice: impose painful reforms and risk collapse now, or postpone them and guarantee a larger collapse later. Over and over again, leaders choose delay. And each delay makes the next crisis bigger, until inflation returns, until debt explodes, until the peso plunges, until the cycle resets. That is why Argentina keeps falling into the same hole, despite knowing exactly where the edge is. Argentina's story isn't one of inevitable failure. It is the story of policy instability, chronic inflation, debt dependence, political polarization, broken trust between citizens and institutions, a country rich in land, talent, and history, yet haunted by decisions made decades ago, repeated generation after generation. Whether Argentina finally escapes this loop will depend not on one election or one reform package, but on whether it can sustain credibility long enough for its people to believe in the system again. Because in economics, belief is everything. And don't forget to hit subscribe for more unraveling mysteries like this.